Jake Caldwell had just poured his second cup of coffee when the sound of hammers broke his peace. Then he saw the white chairs on his lawn. The smell of spring lilac wafted through the cracked kitchen window, mingling with the aroma of black coffee. Jake stood in his slippers, staring at the steam rising from his mug when the sudden clank, clank, clank shattered the morning. For a brief moment, he thought it might be city workers repairing the old fire hydrant on Grove Lane. But the sound was too close, too rhythmic. And when he stepped onto his porch, blinking against the morning sun, his breath caught. Rows of folding chairs lined the edge of his backyard, each one precisely spaced as if awaiting an audience. A white arch, draped in tulle and fake hydrangeas, stood exactly where his granddaughter had once set up a kiddie pool. And beyond that, 2 men in polo shirts hammered wooden stakes into the soft May soil. He lowered his coffee. This wasn't maintenance. This wasn't a mistake. This was a wedding. On his property. For a moment, all he could do was stand there, stunned. He thought of last year's letter from the HOA, the one where they'd fined him $175 for installing a bird feeder not in accordance with community aesthetic standards. They'd called it too rustic, but now, apparently, 50 folding chairs and a full DJ setup were perfectly fine. That is, of course, if you were Karen Whitmore. Jake stepped off the porch, still in his robe and moccasins, following the gravel path to the edge of his yard. A caterer in a navy apron was unloading trays from a van parked halfway up Jake's driveway. He passed the man without a word and continued down the slope toward the chaos. Karen was in the middle of it all, wearing cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse, her platinum bob perfectly curled. She was giving directions to a young woman adjusting the table linens when she spotted Jake. "Oh, Jake," she called out, waving as if they were old friends catching up. "Isn't this exciting?" He didn't return the smile. "What the hell is going on in my yard?" Karen didn't flinch. "Now, let's not start with drama. It's just a small gathering. My daughter's wedding. You remember Stephanie, don't you?" "No," he said flatly. "I don't, and I sure don't recall anyone asking if my yard could be the venue." Karen clicked her tongue. "You weren't at the last HOA meeting. The board approved it. According to Section 3.2 of our Community Engagement Guidelines, any suitable green space may be designated for civic events, provided there are no active objections." Jake raised an eyebrow. "And when exactly was I given the chance to object?" She waved dismissively. "Flyers were distributed. Tom even posted a notice at the community board. It's been public for weeks." "Flyers don't equal consent," Jake snapped. "You didn't ask. You just showed up." Karen's smile tightened, her tone sweet but sharp. "Jake, don't be that neighbor. This is a happy day. Think of it as your contribution to the community." Behind her, a teenage girl snapped selfies in front of his koi pond. A man in a tuxedo lifted a portable speaker onto his freshly reseeded lawn. "Get off my property," Jake said. Karen turned to him fully, her posture stiffening. "If you interfere, you'll leave us no choice but to cite you for non-compliance. I already noticed your trash bins weren't secured last Thursday. And that lawn edging, you've been warned twice already." He felt his hands tighten into fists at his sides. "You think you can just walk all over people?" "Not people," she said softly. "Just you." They locked eyes for a beat too long. "I'm warning you," Jake said low. "No," she replied. "I'm warning you. The event is happening, with or without your blessing. Be a good neighbor, Jake." He stood there as she turned and walked away, her voice rising again to greet new arrivals. He watched the guests begin to trickle in, a few holding gifts, others adjusting ties and sunglasses, oblivious to the fact they were trespassing. Jake turned and walked back to his house. The hallway felt colder than usual. He didn't stop at the kitchen or the porch. He went straight to the hallway closet, opened it, and knelt down to retrieve a wooden drawer built into the baseboard. It slid open with a groan. Inside lay a few old manuals, water shutoff keys, and a rolled schematic from years ago, the outdated irrigation system that once watered the garden beds. He reached past it, grasped the rusted pipe chart, and underneath it found what he was looking for, the sprinkler system manual. Jake mutters, "You want a show, Karen?" "I'll give you one," as he opens the drawer with his old sprinkler system manual. Bridesmaids laughed by the koi pond as if they owned the place. Jake opened his garage door, not to join them, but to dig out copper fittings. A gust of warm afternoon air followed him into the garage, stirring the faint scent of motor oil and cedar. Jake flipped on the switch, illuminating a space that had long been more sanctuary than workspace. Every tool had its place. Wrenches hung in graduated rows, clamps lined up like soldiers, and near the back, pinned beneath a yellowing calendar from 2011, was the old irrigation schematic he hadn't touched in years. He set down his coffee mug and reached up to unpin it, brushing dust from the corner. Outside, the sounds of celebration continued, a mix of shrill laughter, the clang of catering trays, and the hum of a generator powering lights that hadn't been there that morning. He remembered the mailbox, or rather the fine that came with it. Karen had issued a notice stating the cedar post he'd carved by hand didn't meet community standards. The replacement, a soulless plastic model, had cost less than the penalty. That was the moment he realized the rules weren't about order. They were about control. He took a deep breath and rolled out the schematic, flattening it on the workbench. The old system was crude but intact. 4 sprinkler heads ran along the west and north edges of the yard. When operational, they pumped water from a backup tank buried behind the shed, water that hadn't been filtered since the Bush administration. He could almost hear Karen now, shrieking in horror as her ivory aisle turned to rust-stained sludge. But physical chaos alone wouldn't be enough. Karen was good at twisting stories, turning truth into misunderstanding, and trespassing into community service. No, he needed something more precise, something that couldn't be argued down at the next HOA meeting. He sat at the old desktop computer tucked beside the workbench, its fan whining softly as it booted. A quick search led him to the city's code-compliance site. One section stood out, 311 noise complaint, amplified sound without permit. He clicked through, scanned the requirements, and felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. No permit had been filed for Grove Lane. He was sure of it. The screen prompted him to enter details: event address, time, type of disturbance. He hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard, when his phone buzzed in his pocket. Tom. Jake answered without a greeting. "You seeing this circus?" Tom sighed on the other end. "That's why I'm calling." Jake leaned back against the workbench, phone wedged between shoulder and cheek. "You knew this was happening?" "I knew Karen was pushing for a community celebration. I didn't know she'd turn your yard into a wedding hall." Jake's voice dropped. "She said the board approved it. She's using bylaws from 2004, Section 3.2c, back when events were potlucks in driveways, not full-blown weddings. She pulled 2 proxy votes from members who moved out last winter. Technically, she manufactured a quorum." Jake didn't respond right away. He stared at the sprinkler control box mounted beside the tool cabinet. A thin film of grime coated the buttons, but the main switch still glowed faint green. He tapped it with his knuckle, then turned the valve for Zone 1. A distant gurgle came from the yard, followed by a faint hiss. "She went around the process," Jake said, half to himself. Tom's voice grew quieter. "There's more." Jake stopped testing the valve. "Go on." "I overheard something last week. Karen canceled the reservation at the local event hall, said HOA funds would cover the venue. But she never paid the deposit. That money's gone. Spent it on a new dining set, some personal spa charges. I only know because Sheila handles the bookkeeping." Jake stared at the yard through the grimy garage window. His grass had been flattened by rows of folding chairs. He could see the top of the wedding arch swaying gently in the breeze. It looked absurd. "She's not just overstepping," Jake said. "She's hiding theft behind my fence." "Look," Tom said, his tone shifting. "I know what you're thinking, but if you push too hard, she'll bury you in violations. She's done it before." Jake exhaled. "Let her try. This time, I'm not blinking." There was silence for a moment, broken only by the quiet thrum of the generator outside. "You're not alone in this," Tom said finally. "Just be smart." Jake ended the call and returned to the desktop. The complaint form blinked back at him, cursor waiting. He typed in the event's address, description, and uploaded a time-stamped photo of the DJ setup. At the bottom, he typed a title: Noise Violation. Unauthorized wedding event at 14 Grove Lane. He read it twice, then once more. His finger hovered over the submit button, but he didn't press it. Jake uploads a draft complaint titled Noise Violation. Unauthorized wedding event at 14 Grove Lane. But doesn't hit submit yet. Sunlight danced on tablecloths, laughter echoed, and Karen stood greeting guests with a champagne flute. Jake watched through the blinds, finger on the valve switch. The air outside was absurdly perfect. A breeze, gentle enough to stir the sheer white drapes strung between arbor posts, drifted lazily across the yard. The wedding looked like a magazine spread, rows of ivory chairs, floral arrangements in mason jars, a 3-tier cake shaded under a white canopy. Music played softly through speakers placed strategically near the edge of the porch, and the scent of roses mingled with gardenias in full bloom. Jake had kept every curtain drawn that morning. From the inside, the house was silent except for the soft whir of the old fridge and the occasional creak from the floorboards when he shifted his weight. On the dining table, he'd laid out the sprinkler schematics one final time. A wrench, 2 rubber gloves, and a city-issue folder titled Municipal Noise Regulations sat beside them. His phone buzzed once, showing 1:32 p.m. "Half an hour," he muttered. Tom's voice echoed in his head. "It only takes one crack in the image." Jake didn't want a crack. He wanted collapse. He walked the property perimeter like he had the night before, crouching near each sprinkler head. One behind the hydrangea bush, another tucked along the northern fence line, one by the koi pond, and the last near the DJ table, carefully hidden behind a small mound of landscaping rock. He didn't speak, just tested the manual trigger valve on each. Click, hiss, click, gurgle, all primed. At 1:41, a knock came at the back door. Jake hesitated, then opened it. A young man in a tuxedo stood there, hair slightly tousled, a nervous hand in his pocket. "You Jake?" the man asked. "I am." "I'm David," he said. "Stephanie's fiancé, or I guess soon-to-be husband." Jake didn't offer a handshake. "You lost?" David chuckled lightly. "Not exactly. I didn't know this was your yard. Karen told us the venue was community property, like a park." "It's not," Jake said flatly. David rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I figured. I saw your mail slot, and the garden gnome by the door. That's not HOA standard." Jake didn't respond. "I didn't sign up for this," David added. "Stephanie didn't either, not really. Karen took over everything. She told us the hall was under renovation, said this place had been donated to the event fund." Jake tilted his head slightly. "So she lied to you?" David gave a soft laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Wouldn't be the first time." Jake studied him. "So why are you here?" "I guess, to say I get it," David said. "If I were you, I'd be pissed too. I just wanted to let you know. It wasn't personal. And if you're planning to do something, maybe just spare the bride." Jake raised an eyebrow. "You don't think this whole thing is already a mess?" David looked back toward the yard. "I know it is. I just don't know what to do about it anymore." Jake exhaled slowly. Then maybe it's time someone else did. David nodded once, quietly, then turned and walked away. By 1:56 p.m., the chairs were full. Someone had parked a golf cart near the back gate for the bridal procession. Guests murmured in polite tones, the string version of "Can't Help Falling in Love" echoing from the speakers. Jake sat by the sprinkler control box, phone in hand. He'd scheduled the noise complaint submission for 2:01 p.m. The draft was still queued. All it needed was connection. At 1:59, the DJ signaled the procession. The bridesmaids began to walk, carefully lifting their dresses to avoid scuffing their shoes. Stephanie stood at the top of the aisle, bouquet trembling slightly in her hands. She looked radiant and completely unaware. Jake counted the seconds in his head. 2 o'clock. The music swelled. 2:01. Jake flipped the valve. A sudden hiss erupted from the yard. The first sprinkler, near the fence, spat out a dark surge of muddy water. Then the one behind the hydrangeas activated, spraying a fine mist of orange-tinged liquid across the aisle. The koi pond fountain sputtered as runoff backfed through the old irrigation. The speaker nearest the porch cracked, then sparked as brown water soaked its wiring. Guests shrieked and scrambled, shielding dresses and hats. The 3-tier cake, once pristine, began to tilt as the table legs sank into the saturated ground. The sprinkler near the DJ station exploded into full force, hitting the electronics head-on. A sharp pop echoed as the amp blew, followed by dead silence, then gasps. The white aisle turned into a muddy slipstream. One of the bridesmaids lost her shoe and slipped sideways into the flower bed. An elderly woman tripped on the wet grass and had to be helped up by a vendor with a tray of sodden napkins. Karen screamed. She turned toward Jake's house, hair clinging to her cheeks, and took 2 steps toward the porch, only to skid on the mud and fall hard onto her side, her champagne flute still clenched in one hand, like a sword. Jake, still watching through the blinds, didn't smile. Outside, a silver sedan crept around the corner. The logo of the city of Maple Glen was printed on the side door. A city code enforcement car rolls to the curb as Karen slips in the mud. Guests screamed, bridesmaids scattered, and the pristine aisle now looked like a swamp. But Jake didn't move. He simply sipped his coffee. He stood on his porch, half in shadow, the mug warm in his hand. Down below, the chaos churned on. Mud clung to heels and hems. What was once a wedding venue had become a soggy battlefield of upended chairs and dripping decorations. Flower petals stuck to dress shoes, and lace snagged on sprinkler heads. The arch had tilted sideways, its base sunk deep into the soaked lawn. Jake took another sip. The coffee had gone cold, but he didn't care. Karen was shrieking orders to no one in particular. Her voice had gone hoarse, desperation cracking through what remained of her polished exterior. "Shut it off! Find the main valve! Someone, just do something!" Her blazer was stained with brown water, and her once flawless curls had flattened against her forehead. Guests stood in clumps, phones in hand. Some recorded, others murmured. The buzz wasn't just about the ruined ceremony anymore. It was about her. From his porch, Jake could hear a low murmur rising like a tide. A few guests gestured toward his house. One woman in a wide-brimmed hat whispered something, shaking her head. Another looked down at her soaked heels and muttered, "This is private property?" Karen spotted Jake then, her eyes narrowing. She started marching toward him, slipping once on the slick grass, catching herself with a grunt. He set the mug down slowly, stepped off the porch, and met her halfway across the muddy yard. "What have you done?" she spat, voice ragged. "I turned on my sprinklers," Jake said, his tone even. "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "This is sabotage. This," he gestured around them, "is my land, my plumbing, my rights." A hush began to fall over the yard. Guests edged closer, the background chatter dimming. Stephanie had joined the crowd now, her gown ruined from the waist down. Her eyes darted between Jake and her mother. "You're lying," Karen hissed. Jake raised a brow. "Am I?" He reached into the folder tucked under his arm and pulled out a few sheets of paper, printed emails, bylaws, and city property maps. He held them up. "This," he said, "is proof that you never filed for a permit. This," he flipped the page, "is the HOA Handbook, Section 3.2, which says board approval is required for any use of personal property for public events, not just a flyer taped to a community board, an actual vote, which never happened." Karen's expression wavered. "You're not even on the board." "No," another voice cut in. Tom Greer, walking slowly across the lawn. "But I am." He looked tired but resolute, his shoes caked with mud. He held a manila envelope of his own. "And he's right," Tom said. "We checked. No minutes, no vote, no budget approval. Just a purchase on the HOA debit card for a boutique spa and $400 in florals from Lavender, and Lace Karen turned to him. "You're siding with him?" Tom nodded. "I'm siding with the truth." Stephanie stepped forward. "Wait," she said, eyes darting. "You're saying this wasn't a real venue? That we didn't have permission?" Karen's face tightened. "Sweetheart, I was trying to make it special. You know how long you've dreamed of—" "No," Stephanie cut her off, voice shaking. "You told me the HOA booked it. You said it was all taken care of." Karen floundered. "It was a formality." "It was a lie," Jake said. David stepped beside Stephanie but said nothing. His eyes were trained on Karen, unreadable. Karen turned back to Jake, her voice lower now, urgent. "Jake, please, you don't want this to go any further. We can settle this quietly." "It's already gone further," Jake replied. "The city's here. I filed the complaint, and every HOA member in this neighborhood is about to see where their money's been going." He glanced toward the curb where the city code enforcement officer stood, quietly speaking with two guests who had wandered over. A clipboard in hand, pen moving in smooth, practiced lines. Karen's shoulders sagged, just slightly. "You don't know what you're doing," she said, but it sounded weaker now. Jake didn't respond. He just looked at her, then at the crowd, now fully turned toward the scene. They weren't laughing anymore. The wedding was over. The illusion was gone. The HOA president in cream heels now stood in the mud, with a paper trail behind her and no allies at her side. A voice, sharp but quiet, cut through the silence. "She's finished?" As the remaining guests stare in silence, one woman whispers loud enough for all to hear. "She's finished?" Karen tried to speak over the murmurs, but no one was listening. Then the city inspector stepped forward with a clipboard. The sun was beginning to drop low behind the trees, lining Maple Glen, casting long shadows across the street. The laughter that had once floated over the lawns had vanished, replaced by hushed voices and the distant chirp of birds settling into early evening. Folding chairs stood abandoned in crooked rows, soggy napkins clung to the bushes, and the wedding arch now leaned pitifully to one side. Karen stood at the center of it all, her once pristine outfit stained and clinging to her frame. Her voice cracked with urgency as she attempted to explain, to justify, to spin. It wasn't unauthorized. It was misunderstood. Jake must have tampered with the irrigation. That's what caused the problem. You've all seen how bitter he is. But even as she spoke, people turned away. Some folded their arms. Others looked down. The murmur didn't stop. Tom stood to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. He didn't speak, not yet. The city inspector cleared his throat. He was a stocky man in a city-issued jacket, clipboard tucked against his chest. "Ms. Whitmore," he said calmly, "as per Municipal Code 14.3a, you are being issued a formal citation for violation of city noise regulations and unauthorized use of residential property for a commercial-scale event." Karen blinked. "Commercial?" This was my daughter's wedding. Vendors were paid. Guests were invited from outside the neighborhood. The amplified sound system was used without a permit. He extended a sheet of paper. The fine totals $10,000. You have 30 days to contest or remit payment. The weight of the number seemed to press the air from Karen's lungs. She didn't reach for the paper. Her hand trembled at her side. Stephanie stood near the edge of the sidewalk, still barefoot, her dress clinging to her legs. Mascara streaked her cheeks. She hadn't said a word since the sprinklers went off. "Mom?" Her voice cracked. Karen turned to her, seizing the lifeline. "Sweetie, it got out of control, I know, but I did it for you. I wanted your day to be special." "You told me it was all taken care of," Stephanie whispered. "It was. I had a plan." "You lied." Karen reached for her. "I was trying to give you something beautiful. I wanted it to be perfect." Stephanie stepped back. "You used someone's yard without asking. You stole HOA money, and you lied to me. I don't even know what part of today was real." David, who had been standing a few feet away, finally stepped forward. His bow tie was loose now, his jacket long since abandoned. "I tried to ignore it," he said quietly. "The red flags, the way you bulldozed people, the way Stephanie always had to apologize for you." Karen's eyes darted. "David, I can't do this," he said, looking directly at Stephanie. "Not because of you, but because of everything this represents." Stephanie stared at him. "You're leaving me?" "I'm leaving this," he said. "I don't want to start a life wrapped in lies." A silence fell over the group. A neighbor cleared their throat. A car rolled slowly past, the driver gawking before moving on. Karen turned toward the crowd, desperate now. "You're all just taking his side?" she shouted, pointing toward Jake's porch. Jake said nothing. He stood with Tom, his arms crossed loosely. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Karen continued, louder now. "You all saw what he did. He set me up. He sabotaged the system. That's why the water was brown. He did it on purpose." The inspector scribbled something on his clipboard but didn't respond. "No one's surprised," a voice said from the group. It was Cheryl Dawson, a longtime resident with a crisp bob and orthopedic sandals. "You've been walking over people for years." "I was protecting standards," Karen cried. "You were protecting control," Tom said, stepping forward now. "You made enemies by pretending to be everyone's friend, and now you're out of friends." Karen's mouth opened and closed. Her shoulders slumped. People began to drift away, slowly, casually. A few guests walked to their cars. Vendors started packing equipment. Even Stephanie turned and began walking up the sidewalk alone. Karen looked smaller now, drenched and wilted, surrounded by toppled tables and empty chairs. Jake didn't move from his spot. He watched as Karen took a slow, shaky breath and turned back toward her house. Then someone stepped forward from the sidewalk. A tall woman with a clipboard of her own, gray hair tucked under a baseball cap. She moved toward Tom and handed him a folded paper. He opened it, brows lifting as he read. "What is it?" Jake asked. Tom glanced at him, then back at the woman. "It's a petition," she nodded, "to dissolve the HOA." Karen stands alone, mud-soaked, mascara streaked, as a neighbor discreetly hands Tom a petition. "Let's dissolve the HOA." Sunday morning, Jake sat on his porch with his old mug, watching bluebirds return to the feeder, something they hadn't done in months. The morning was still, with a light breeze moving through the maple trees. A patch of early sun glinted off the dew-covered grass. Jake sat with his legs stretched, the same mug in his hand that had survived 2 decades of morning coffee and 5 HOA complaints. The feeder hung from its familiar spot on the porch beam, a little crooked, but full of seed. 2 birds flitted down, one landing on the edge, the other bouncing slightly on the wire perch. They didn't spook like they used to. He took a slow sip, and smiled. Down the street, Maple Glen was waking up. A boy on a bike coasted past without a helmet, something that used to earn a warning letter. A couple walked their dog without the HOA-mandated leash-length tag. No one seemed worried. Jake stood, walked to the edge of his porch, and looked out over the lawn. It was still rough. Some of the sprinkler ruts hadn't healed yet, and the garden gnome had been knocked sideways. But it was his. Fully his. There were still bits of ribbon tangled in the hydrangeas and a muddy heel print near the koi pond. But he didn't mind. In a strange way, they reminded him that peace sometimes looked messy at first. Mid-morning, a knock came on the screen door. Tom stood outside, holding 2 cups of coffee in a cardboard tray. Jake raised a brow. "Bribery?" Tom grinned. "Appeasement." Jake let him in, motioning toward the porch chairs. Tom handed him a cup and settled in beside him. "We vote tonight," Tom said. "Meeting at 6. Official dissolution." Jake nodded. "You think it'll pass?" "Unanimously," Tom said. "She's gone. Movers pulled in this morning. She didn't say goodbye to anyone." Jake didn't look surprised. "Fitting?" Tom took a sip. "I still can't believe it unraveled that fast." Jake chuckled. "It didn't. It took years. The wedding just snapped the last thread." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the wind move through the trees. Later that afternoon, David stopped by. He looked tired, a backpack slung over one shoulder, his rental car idling at the curb. "I'm headed out," he said when Jake answered the door. "Figured I owed you a proper goodbye." Jake stepped out, hands in his pockets. "Where are you going?" "East. Don't know exactly. Somewhere without a neighborhood charter and a mother-in-law from hell." Jake smiled. "That narrows it down." David glanced around the yard, then back at Jake. "You didn't have to do what you did." "I didn't do it for you," Jake replied, then added, "But I'm glad you got out clean." David nodded. "Me too. Take care, Mr. Caldwell." Jake watched him drive off, the taillights disappearing around the corner. Just after 5, a moving truck pulled out of the driveway across the street. Karen never appeared. One of the workers locked the front door behind him and tossed a ring of spare keys into a cardboard box. The house looked smaller without her in it. That evening, Jake walked to the old HOA building. The lights were already on. A folding table stood near the door with a stack of ballots and a sign-in sheet. A few neighbors greeted him, some for the first time in years. They spoke softly, shook his hand, made eye contact that held a little longer than usual. When the vote came, no one argued. The motion was read. The decision was unanimous. The Maple Glen Homeowners Association was officially dissolved. Jake stepped out of the building just as the streetlights flickered on. The night air was crisp, but not cold. He paused at the top of the steps, looking out over the street where, just one day earlier, it had all come undone. Tom joined him a moment later, tucking the folded results into his jacket. "Well," he said, "that's that." Jake nodded. "Took long enough." Tom turned, a grin slowly forming. "You ever think about running for mayor?" On a quiet Sunday morning, peace returned not just to Jake's yard, but to the whole street, one bird and one neighbor at a time. The battle hadn't needed shouting or force, only patience, truth, and a man unwilling to be walked on. Sometimes the strongest fences aren't built with wood or wire, but with quiet resolve and a firm understanding of where your line is. In standing up, Jake reminded a town that home isn't just where we live. It's what we protect together. And when the dust settles and the sprinklers dry, what matters most is knowing that dignity, like good soil, grows deeper when we stand our ground.